Welcome back to the Drive Home Reviews podcast, where I review the movies that I have just seen as I'm driving home from the theater. And for the young kids in the audience, because I know there's nothing that the youth of today love more than listening to my film review podcast. One thing that inevitably comes with the advancement in years is that it seems like at a certain point, and it's different for everybody, but it does seem like at a certain point it becomes a lot harder for you to differentiate between the various members of the latest crop of celebrities and movie stars.
Every year, I recognize fewer and fewer names.
Lombard Montague, Grace McLady, Andy Colorado, the Mondo Twins, Purple Stuff, Tank Top Gay Face, Chad Zachary, Zach Chadwick, Chad Chaddenson, C. Zachary Chad, and a live performance by Starburst featuring NYTFH $.
For example, it was only a couple of years ago that I finally learned the difference between Ryan Gosling, Channing Tatum, and Bradley Cooper. Up until then, I wouldn't be able to pick them out of a lineup. The difference, of course, being that one has an annoying screen presence, one has a genuine and goofy but often inconsistent screen presence, and the other has no screen presence. I bring this up because from the moment I started watching this film, the moment I decided that I was going to watch this film and review it, I was coming at it with the absolute positive belief that Sydney Sweeney was in fact Sabrina Carpenter. Now, I can hear the young people in the audience's eyes rolling at how out of touch Grandpa is, and all I can say in my defense is, give me a break, kids, all right? I do have other things that I need to spend my time worrying about, and to be completely honest, as a man who is much closer to being a half a century old as opposed to a quarter of a century old, I don't think it's wise to spend the majority of my time trying to familiarize myself with every pretty, blonde, white girl. Something about it just seems skeezy to me. So I was planning my response to this film under that misconception. Luckily, I actually did take the time to look it up and do some preliminary research and was made aware of my mistake. And after feeling completely asinine for a while, I kind of resolved that a lot of my original assumptions about this film and its origins are not wholly out of place. My original belief was this was an attempt by a bubblegum pop princess to take a stab at legitimacy by doing something so alien to her public persona that you couldn't help but take her seriously. And while that is not exactly the case, it is still a flavor of it. Having familiarized myself, or at least made myself aware of Miss Sweeney's more extensive filmography, I have to say that I am impressed by the range of films and projects that she has chosen to tackle. I think given where she is, it would have been very easy for her to give in to the pretty blonde stereotype and just kind of ride that. This kind of film would be something you wouldn't do until, maybe a decade later when that kind of wore off and you were trying to make a comeback. But as I look at her filmography, she has made some pretty bold choices and has kind of dipped her toe into a lot of different genres. Things like, A Handmaid's Tale and Euphoria. She's done a superhero movie. a shitty one, but she still did it. You know, she's done rom-coms. She's kind of been all over the place. So while this movie is not as I originally believed, someone trying to prove themselves a legitimate actor, I do feel like this is Sydney Sweeney taking her first big swing at a solo starring vehicle. This is Sydney Sweeney's movie. And you can tell that by the fact that there are not a lot of other name actors in this. This is a character actor's film. And so this is a film that I think she decided she wanted to do, not just because she connected with the material, but because she had a desire to prove that she was legit, and she is someone that you're going to need to keep an eye on, especially if you're someone like, you know, let's say Jennifer Lawrence, who was kind of in that same grouping about a decade ago with Hunger Games and the X-Men movies, that Sydney is here. She's a serious player, and she might be coming for your crown. So the connection of star to material is not as off as I thought it was going to be. So with that out of the way, let's actually talk about how she does in this movie and how this movie works as a whole. So for those who don't know, and I include myself in this, because previous to this I had no clue who Christy Martin was. I've never been a boxing fan. So that world is one that I am not familiar with. But from what I've learned is that Christy Martin was and is one of the most important figures in the realm of women's boxing, and probably in women's sports, depending on who you ask. You know, this is the first woman boxer signed by Don King. Now, again, you young people might not understand that and the significance of that, but for those of us who lived through the 90s, even if you weren't a boxing fan, you knew who Don King was, and you knew his influence over it. So the fact that she was the first woman he signed, it says something. You know, she was one of the first to appear on a pay-per-view on a Mike Tyson undercard. You know, she legitimized the sport for women, and on top of that, led a very complex and tragic private life. So this is a person who was aware of their sexuality, that she was a lesbian from a very young age, who existed in a time when that kind of information about a person could ruin their life. Didn't have supportive parents on the matter, and was content to kind of try to hide, well, not content, that's the wrong word, but to try to please others, and out of fear, the fear that was instilled in her about what would happen if this all came to light, chose instead, she married a man, she married her trainer and manager, who was 25 years her senior, and like right from the beginning, this was a red flag, abusive relationship, and it's not until you get really into it, and even until you do some even basic preliminary research on her, that you realize just how abusive the relationship was. So there's a lot going on here. There is a lot of layers to this film. So right away I can say one of the things it does well is that it creates a curiosity about the person. I think that's the sign of a good biopic, is if after seeing it you're like, well, I want to know more about this person. I want to know more about their life. I want to get the details, because the film can't go into everything, which we'll talk about that here in a second. But I wanted to read about her more. I hear she has a book out that the movie is based on. I want to read it. I want to know more about her, and that, you know, I think that's the mark of a good biopic, is not just making you curious about a person, but also bringing into a wider realm of knowledge people who had a huge impact, but maybe because they belong to an esoteric or small subculture that maybe the general populace doesn't know about. You know, I think of the other contact sport biopic from earlier in the year, Queen of the Ring, and how many people don't know anything about the wrestling world, and how that movie showed a lot of the history. So I think that right in its way, this film is genuine and it is heartfelt and it's sincere. The people making it, I think they all wanted to do justice to this story. This doesn't feel to me like a lot of biopics do. Like, okay, I'm gonna get some hate for this, but I don't feel like Nuremberg was a desire to bring this person or these people to a more common state of knowledge. This isn't something that I felt was there to share specific details that maybe people didn't know. It was Oscar bait. That's what it was. That was the purpose behind it. It was a prestige movie, and you feel it. This one, while I do think it's a prestige movie, and I don't think they would say no to any kind of award nomination, I don't feel like that is the purpose behind it. I feel like this was people wanting to share a story that they cared about, and I appreciate that level of sincerity. The movie also doesn't shy away from this being a very ugly world. The sport of boxing, especially in the 90s, was an ugly, ugly world. Again, I didn't even follow it, but it seemed like all through that decade, and it was always tied to Don King, there was always some kind of shenanigans or investigation or whatever going on. So the boxing world is already shady. And throwing in just what this poor woman was going through, when she wasn't on camera, it's interesting duality in that she was pumped up, always wearing pink. That became her signature color. She became kind of like a character in a pro wrestling world, which is again what Don King specialized in. Trash talking, cutting promos, having a distinctive character, like she always wears pink. So you're putting on this character for the audience, but when the lights are off, the ugly world that this poor person was trapped in, it's not shy about it. Even down to like the fashions and the way people look. This is not a pretty movie to look at. You know how with a CW show, the first thing that hits you with any CW show is like, wow, everybody in this is really pretty. Wow, this movie about people being 100 teenagers being on Earth after it's been abandoned for centuries, they're all still really pretty. This movie is the opposite of that. Everybody is. This is an ugly, ugly movie, and everybody, it looks like they are desperately trying to make them as unattractive as possible. And that's not a knock, it's just an observation. So let's talk about, as I mentioned, this is Sydney Sweeney's movie. This is her taking the center stage and really resting the whole film on her shoulders. So how does she do? Pretty good. Pretty good, I'd say. I think that she really goes into it. She really does. And I give her all the credit in the world for not just what this had to do physically, to get into shape to be a boxer, but what she had to go through, because this is her movie. Like, I don't think there's a scene where she's not on screen, or she's not the focal point of the film. at every moment. I think she does a pretty decent job, and she handles herself with a lot of skill and talent. I feel like I'm being very backhanded at this moment, because I have to say, and I gotta be honest, I don't think the performance gets all the way there. And it isn't from lack of trying. She is giving it everything she's got, and I think that's kinda the issue. I think that this is my opinion. Now, all of this is my opinion, but my opinion, and I'm not at the level of an actor or performer she is. She's got an IMDb page with multiple credits. I've got none of that. So take this for however it's worth. But I think that to tell a story like this, especially one that jumps multiple years, like by the time everything really goes down, it's already in like 2010. So Christy Martin would have been in her late 30s, maybe heading towards her 40s. I think that to play something like this completely, I think demands a certain maturity, a certain world weariness. That is not to discount Miss Sweeney's acting ability or her life or her experiences, her hardships, her successes. It's not to discount any of that. I'm just saying that at 28, I don't know if you have, and I would kind of hope you wouldn't have the life experiences that would give you frame of reference, let's say, for something like this. And I don't subscribe to the method theory. I actually think that the method and all that is very dangerous and does more harm than good. So I'm not saying to play something you have to have experienced it or experience something similar, but I am saying there are perspectives and knowledge and just an outlook on the world that a person in their late 30s has that someone in their late 20s just doesn't, in most circumstances. And I don't think she's quite there yet. And again, this is not to say that she gives a bad performance, or that this movie fails in what she set out to do, because it brought attention to the story, which is what she wanted, and it also, I think it does stake her claim very clearly that she's going to be a powerhouse contender. I believe that. I believe that given a few more years, some more training and some more experience, I think she's going to pull stuff like this off no problem. But I do feel like at this point she's straining against her own age, and that's nothing anybody can help. It doesn't lessen the performance. I just don't think it gets it to where maybe she was hoping it would get her, if that makes any sense. So I feel like I'm being very backhanded here, and I don't intend to be, but that's my take on her performance. As I said, the rest of the cast is made up of a lot of character actors, so nobody you're really going to recognize right off the bat, and I think that's all for the good. This you don't want a biopic like this. Again, I keep comparing this to Nuremberg, and I know people are going to hate me for that, but in this one you don't have a bunch of well-known actors and celebrities mugging for the camera, putting on their best fake accents and saying, and I'll take my Oscar over there. You really have a lot of character actors who are designed by training and experience to blend together and make a cohesive ensemble to help support this one story. So there's not a lot of other performances I want to point out, except for two. So first of all, I want to point out Ben Foster, who plays her husband. And first of all, I totally forgot about this guy as an actor. Last thing I saw him in, this shows how much attention I pay. Last thing I remember seeing him in was X-Men 3, The Last Stand, where he played Angel. I also never thought he was that tall. I don't know if that's because Sydney Sweeney is shorter, but he looks much taller than this. I think he's also filled out. He's always been a very skinny fellow. But he's always been a chameleon. He's always been someone who could blend in and do the job that needed. And I don't think we give enough credit to the actors who have to play these abusive monsters and what that does to them psychologically. First of all, I think people who play characters like this, one thing I believe is that if you're playing a character like this, you must be a pretty decent person in real life. And I know that from experience. I played in college. There was a play I was in, and I played 3 different abusive husbands with different levels of abuse: verbal abuse, mental abuse, physical abuse. And I can tell you that that is not an easy job. It is not. But I can also tell you one of the most flattering things that I've ever been told is when I got the part, both the director and the lead actress, who was a friend of mine, both of them told me that we wanted you in this role because we knew we could trust you. And if you're going to be vulnerable on screen or on stage in scenes like this, you want to make sure the person you're acting with is someone you feel safe with and you know that you can stop. And so I think that speaks very highly to Ben Foster as a human being. And it speaks to him as an actor, because God almighty, do you hate this motherfucker. And when you learn about him, if you go and do research and you learn just what a motherfucker he was, this film actually tones it down. Like, this guy was really the king of Shithead Mountain, you know? So that cannot be an easy role to step into. It cannot. So kudos to Ben Foster for doing so and being that safe person for this movie. Like that, I'm sure that was very helpful to everyone involved. The only other person I really want to give kudos to is Chad Coleman, who plays Don King, because he really does a great job. Don King is the easiest character of all these ones that you could slip into caricature, because Don King basically is, and was at that time, a walking, talking cartoon. But yeah, I think he managed to get the personality and the charisma and that blend between a used car salesman, a carnival barker, and a shrewd as hell businessman. Not a lot of screen time, but he pulls it off really well. So I think that's a big plus for him. So the movie in general is good, but I wouldn't say it's great. So where does it fall down? And I think the best I can put it, after having thought about it for a while, is it feels like the story they're trying to tell is incomplete. Now, make no mistake, there is a lot, as I said, there's a lot that went on in this woman's life. There is a lot. So, trying to get it all in there is going to be difficult. It's kind of like a lot of people gave the Iron Claw a hard time because there were actually 5 Von Erich brothers. But, you know, you've got to give the audience a breather somewhere. You know, you've got to, you know. So, yeah, things get cut. But, yeah, reading this woman's story, for instance, well, let's not even go there with that. Let's talk about it. They had to pick a theme. They had to pick a lane. And there's a lot of places you can go. You can go with domestic abuse. You could go with LGBTQ plus rights. You can go with drug addiction and all of this. And this film really this is a movie about domestic abuse. That is what it is about. And so everything in there, that's the main point it's coming out with. That's what it wants to highlight. And it does that. But I also think it's trying to incorporate so many other things, like the boxing story, like her career, like her rise, her big matches, that some of the things get lost. For instance, she mentions just in basic interviews, this is me just doing basic research, that one of the ways her husband maintained control over her was through cocaine, that he got her hooked on cocaine, and he was the supplier, so he controlled how much she got. There's one scene where they show it, but it seems to me like that's a pretty huge deal. And it doesn't really get highlighted. Her recovery from it doesn't get really talked about. She's on it, and then it's never mentioned again. Likewise, it turns out she was abused sexually when she was a kid. And that, to me, is something that would spark and play into a lot of these themes of abuse, and why don't you come forward, and why didn't you do this, and why didn't you do that? Well, that would go into it. Again, I understand that you have to cut things. I understand you have to condense things. But I feel like there are things that could have been included at the expense of maybe another montage. You know, that we didn't need all of the boxing stuff in there. I guess it does present the juxtaposition between the glamorous life people thought she was leading and the secret hell she was trapped in. But I think we could have done away with some of that and focused more on more important character and narrative beats. For instance, okay, this is one. So one of the themes that they go with is that she's standoffish, she's combative, that she didn't have a lot of friends, that even though she was the leader of this women's revolution in boxing, that a lot of the other women didn't like her because of what she said about them. And that might have been something to explore a little bit. I don't know. How true is that? That's something I'm curious about. That's something I would have liked to have seen, because it does illustrate how isolated she was. And that's something that abusers do, is isolate people from any kind of support system. But we don't really see examples of that. We see that she trash talks during press conferences. I'm sorry, isn't that what boxers do? You know, they show her like trash talking a couple of them and making homophobic remarks, and then the other boxer looking like, oh, she said something horrid to me. It's like, you're a professional boxer. Have you never seen one of these? I'm not a boxing fan, and I can tell you this is the shit that goes on at a press conference. You know, so they don't really do a good job of showing that isolation. Likewise, one of the themes that the film goes with, especially after this god-awful, horrific attack where her husband tries to kill her in the most cold-blooded and brutal way possible. And one of the things that's brought up is that, you know, so that of course she has a hard time trusting people. Of course she didn't tell a lot of people about this. And then she goes back to her gym, and her 3 corner men are all there, and they're all staring at her, and she's wondering how they're going to react to this sudden news, because her husband, before trying to murder her, had tried to ruin her life by posting things that she was gay, and you know, are these people going to accept me? And then they all hug, and they're like, that's great, but I really have no fucking idea who these other 3 guys are. Like, we're introduced to one of them as her corner doctor. The other guy is just suddenly there, and he's another one of her trainers. He's like chubby Elvis. He's got like the pompadour and a tracksuit. I don't even know his name. And then there's a third dude who's in her corner. I have no fucking clue who he is. Like, I thought it was her brother at first, but it's not. I don't know who this guy is. And And I bring this up because it's not necessary. Yes, it's her story, and you don't need to know everything about these other people. But if part of your thesis is that she can open up and she can trust other people, and you're trying to show that she can trust and does trust these people, and that means she can trust other people after this horrific event, it might have been a good idea to show us a little bit more about who they are to her. The only one that really gets any kind of character is Chubby Elvis. And again, I don't know the guy's fucking name. Like, he does notice things are going wrong, and he says to her, you can come talk to me. He is her confidant when she needs it. So we do get a little bit of him, but these other guys, like, I don't know who they are to her. Especially since her husband controls so much. It's like, I don't see scenes where, either he's manipulating them and telling them lies or whatever. I feel like the movie wants to tell you everything, but also is trying to keep a narrow focus on the story to keep it within the 3-act structure. And I feel like as a result of that, it comes up feeling a little half-baked. Like it didn't cook all the way. Like maybe the screenplay needed another pass. Maybe something was lost in the editing. Maybe certain scenes needed more detail and certain scenes needed editing. I don't know. But it does feel like it's not quite what it could be throughout most of it. So yeah. Now I want to be clear, because I've spent a lot of times talking about where this movie doesn't quite reach its goals. But I want to be clear that I do not think this is a bad movie by any stretch. In fact, because it's a good movie, and because so much care and attention and heart is put into it, these things that don't work and don't go along with that, they stand out a bit more. So, in a weird backhanded compliment kind of way, criticizing this movie this much as me basically saying this is how good it is. Because it is good, and I do think I applaud everyone involved for taking on a difficult task, because this is a hard story, guys. And the more you read about it, and the more you read about what, again, they didn't put in, holy shit, the fact that this woman is alive, is happy and healthy, and leading a good life, it's even more of a miracle. And I wish that the movie could have captured that a little bit, but I do feel like its heart's in the right place, and it is giving it all it's got. So I can respect that. All right, I feel like I'm at that point where I'm talking around in circles. So let's get to the point. So, final grade for Christy. I'm gonna go a B+ on it. It has a feeling like it might be being tugged towards the B- area, but I think there's enough good in here. And again, for me, good intentions and earnest filmmaking will kind of win out over technical issues and pacing problems. So I give this one a B+. I think it's a worthwhile film, and like I said, it's encouraged me to go learn more about this person, which is the best thing a movie like this can do. So it did its job. So well done. All right. So there you have it. That's my thoughts on that one. So I don't know when this review will air. I have a feeling it's going to be after the holiday season, probably into the new year. So if that is the case, Happy New Year to everybody. Rest assured, new reviews of new movies will be coming, along with the return of our annual best of, worst of, and meh. So though that will be coming. I hope the new year is treating you well and good. And as always, drive safe, and I will see you at the movies.